So, Michael, Arturo mentioned the role of government in causing the crisis. Ibrahim noted the role of government in helping them make sure the crisis wasn't worse than it was. You were formerly up on the Hill. What's your perspective on this question of the role that government plays? And as Ibrahim was just saying, we know that we're going to have future financial crises. This wasn't the last one we'll ever have. How do you see this from the perspective of where government fits in?
Bankers are whiners. That's a great quote, Ibrahim, because certainly members of Congress are whiners as well. So I went to the Hill January 2009, worked for Congressman Honda for 4 years, left recently to run a foreign policy program. Congressman Honda at the time was on the House Budget Committee. So what we did in response to Paul Ryan's budget, thank you for mentioning Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan had a very austere budget, path to prosperity. Van Hollen, who was ranking member of the House Budget, had a response. We didn't feel that that was progressive enough to deal with the problems on the table post-financial crisis. So I helped write for my boss and for a few other members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is 80 members of the House, an alternative budget, which we called the People's Budget, which then became the Budget for All, and I'm not sure what it is now. But we had several iterations of that, which then Paul Krugman supported, The Guardian supported, The Economist supported, Washington Post, Matt Miller wrote a nice piece on it. Jeff Sachs came out, not surprisingly, swinging for it. To no avail. We had a Custer last stand on the House floor where 80 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus talked about this alternative way forward. That was great schooling for me. I left exhausted from the Hill, and I think I left in time because I actually have a job now, which is good. A lot of my peers are working on furlough. But I want to identify 6 things that I think we have not yet fixed. And forgive a little redundancy, but chatter beforehand was like, should we talk about Dodd-Frank? And I think we can't not talk about Dodd-Frank. But let me just identify 6 quick things. From a legal perspective, we have not held any of the execs on Wall Street in the banking sector at the highest level accountable for what is arguably fraud. A few other countries in Europe have, we have not. The FBI would counter saying, no, we've indicted 2,000 or 3,000 lenders, but that's small lenders. Those are the people who actually didn't do the CDOs or the credit default swaps. These are the people just handing out the money. So the FBI is like, no, we indicted these. The FBI also would say we don't have enough people on hand to bring Wall Street to justice, because where'd all the FBI agents go? To terrorism. So FBI agents are saying we don't have enough staff on hand to actually. So legally, we have a lot of work to do if we want to hold. As of September, mid-September, Reuters article, Sarah Martin, I think is her name, wrote a piece. We've not indicted we've not brought anyone from Wall Street, highest level execs, to justice. We need to. 1. 2, financial industry. No surprise, financial industry is the biggest contributor of campaign monies to Congress, roughly $5 billion over the last 10 years. That's a problem. They're the biggest industry. In my foreign policy job, I'm fighting the defense industry because they're building a lot of stuff we don't need. In fact, that we send to the Arizona graveyard. We've got $35 billion worth of defense equipment that we don't need thanks to the defense industry. Financial industry so powerful that the banks just kind of walked away with a slap on the wrist. $25 billion to some homeowners, $2,000 to you, $2,000. I got a letter because Bank of America is handles my mortgage. Sorry, you didn't qualify for the $2,000. Or reduction in your principal. Financial industry controls Congress. I don't think you have to be a conspiracy theorist to say it. Just look at the numbers. Hillary Clinton, up until 2008, received $31 million from the financial industry. Barack Obama was 27, McCain was 26, and Kerry was 19. $5 billion in 10 years. 2. 3, look at the politics of what's happened. Tea Party came about, Occupy Wall Street came about, and now the shutdown. I say those in order because Tea Party, Occupy, extremes on either end, and that it has led to the vitriol, the venom, the irrational pontificating on Senate and House floors, which has ultimately created the shutdown. This is deeply problematic for the markets and for our political system. 4, policy. So Dodd-Frank, the majority of the rules of Dodd-Frank have not actually been implemented. they're stalled. They're postponed. They're not being reviewed. Majority. It's a slim majority. It's like 50+%, 53, 54. Majority of dodd-frank has been implemented. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was going to come out strong with Elizabeth Warren. Republicans were like, no. We got Cordray, which is fine. But then she's like, OK, well, I'm just going to run for the Senate. Thankfully, she got in. Hopefully, she'll be able to move some of that financial reg forward. SEC chair recently had problems with the transparency requirements in Dodd-Frank. She came out last week saying, I have problems with the transparency requirements. It seems a little too rigorous. So you're seeing still risky trading, derivatives, credit default swaps happening on Wall Street. We're back in it. That's a problem if we're going to face the depression and another recession that the Dean said, and then the depression that Ibrahim said. Fifth, public. For the first time ever, we now have a narrative of the 1% versus the 99%. That's a new narrative that we didn't have before. Occupy Wall Street certainly used that. We also have the greatest income inequality since the Great Depression. So if you look at kind of a bookend of inequality, it was the Great Depression and then the Great Recession. So we now have the highest income inequality since the early 1900s. Why is that a problem? Well, it's a huge problem for the economy. It's a problem for mobility, social mobility. It's a problem for opportunity. There are also some correlations, which I can talk about later, that correlate highly with violence. In terms of income inequality, it tends to correlate highly with violence in states and cities and countries. But that narrative is new, which we can debate whether it's a good thing. Lastly, I just want to talk about the international front. Iceland, already mentioned, went down first. They were borrowing 120 billion. They only had like a GDP of 13 billion. So they didn't have the money. They were spending money they didn't have. What's interesting about Iceland is they didn't bail out the bankers. They actually took them to a court of law, held them criminally responsible for misdeeds, fraud primarily. They forgave consumer debt, mortgage debt, and their economy is back. Now, it's slow growth, but it's back. They also happen to be consistently the most peaceful nation in the world, according to the Global Peace Index, which the Economist Intelligence Unit and Institute for Economics and Peace, which I did some consultancy on, ranks. That's interesting because you're saving money because you're not spending money on violence like the US is doing, so there's some interesting correlates there. And I just want to add to that Cyprus. A lot of people think that what happened in Cyprus is going to happen elsewhere, which is a bail-in, where they were looking for a bailout. They said to all their depositors, okay, everyone in this room, I know you have savings of like 40,000 euro in the Bank of Cyprus. You probably, you maybe have savings of 60,000 euro. All of you, 6% cut. You're all going to pay for our problem. Of course, there was great pushback, and then they only went to the people who were investing about 100,000 euro or more, and they paid for most of the bailout there. But a lot of people think that that bail-in is going to happen more and more. And some people feel, I don't necessarily agree with this, but it's already in the fine print in the US. So those would be my kind of six-sector analysis.
Great. Thank you.